Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Planning Commission meeting for September 23rd, 2024. For viewers watching at home, some members of the public may be participating via video conference or telephone conference. Will everybody please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Will the secretary please call the roll?
Commissioner Ferris?
Here.
Commissioner Tyler Kettlehut?
Here.
Commissioner McMahon?
Here.
Vice Chair Link?
In the flesh?
Chair Lenson?
Here. Number 4, tonight we have with us Deputy Community Director Fabiola Melliker. Are there any written comments, announcements, continuances at this time?
Thank you, Chair. We have a supplemental packet that has been distributed to the Commission and posted containing information on written correspondence from both the staff and the public related to item 7A.
Next, public comments. Do we have any public comments?
No.
So we will skip item 6 and go to item 5, go to item 6. Next, we have the consent calendar for the minutes of September 9th Planning Commission meeting. Do any of my fellow commissioners have any comments or a motion to approve the consent calendar? Commissioner Ferris?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Any other comments? Please prepare us for a vote.
Commissioner Ferris?
Yes.
Commissioner Tyler Kettlehut?
Abstain.
Commissioner McMahon?
Yes.
Vice Chair Link?
Abstain.
Chair Lenson?
Yes.
Motion carries 3-0. Commissioner Tyler Kettlehut and Vice Chair Link abstaining.
Sounds great. Let's go on to item 7. Will the secretary please open the public hearing?
Hearing having been advertised as required by law is hereby open to consider Agenda Item 7A, Municipal Code Amendment MCA 2024-70004, to amend Chapters 3, 4, and 10 of Title 9 of the Thousand Oaks Municipal Code to implement the 2021 to 2029 housing element programs for voluntary lot mergers, SB 35 streamlined process and incentives for affordable housing with lot consolidation, and to find that pursuant to Sections 15183 and 15168C25 of the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, no further environmental document is required because the proposed actions are consistent with the city's goals, policies, and anticipated programs contained in the adopted general plan and housing element covered under a certified program environmental impact report, EIR. Located citywide, the applicant is the City of Thousand Oaks.
Thank you, as always, for doing a great job reading all that. We have with us Senior Planner Ian Holt.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. So as Lori just summarized for you, we have housing element implementation programs 4 and 6 before you tonight, and the municipal code amendments that are associated with those changes. So, the request before you is to amend several sections of the municipal code that relate to subdivisions as well as streamlined process and also incentives for affordable housing. Those 3 components are basically within programs 4 and 6 of the the certified housing element. So just as a quick background, the certified housing element identifies 18 programs and actions that are necessary for the city in meeting their regional housing needs allocation, and the timely implementation of those are essential to maintaining our certification with HCD. So just to quickly refresh ourselves on the programs and the goal. The specific goal is Goal 1, which is providing a wide range of housing opportunities for persons of all incomes. Program 4 basically consists of lot consolidation. There's 2 components of that. One, the ministerial process for lot consolidation, as well as developing appropriate lot consolidation incentives that provide flexibility in the site planning and design of mixed use and multifamily development. The other, Program 6, is essentially a fairly similar code amendment to what we had done when we brought the mixed-use standards to you under AB 1397, albeit that was under a different type of project criteria. But essentially, we're acknowledging the streamlined process that's required on SB 35 as part of that code amendment. So just a quick background as far as the lot consolidation process as it exists today with the city. So currently, how the city processes lot mergers or lot consolidation, kind of the same thing, is through a parcel map waiver. And that's just because that is the process that is available at this time. However, it does require a notification and a hearing for that process. The existing subdivision ordinance of for Thousand Oaks, it only addresses lot mergers in terms of city-initiated mergers of non-conforming parcels that meet a very specific criteria. And that basically also requires notice and a potential public hearing if the owner objects to such a merger. So the section of the subdivision ordinance that we have is basically verbatim what's taken from the Subdivision Map Act. So, and then, however, under a separate section of the Subdivision Map Act, which is Government Code Section 66499.20.3, that allows the jurisdiction to create an ordinance for lot merging purposes. And essentially, in my research, as well as in coordination with the Public Works Department land surveyor, the voluntary lot merger is the term that a lot of jurisdictions do to kind of distinguish it from that city-initiated merger versus one that is voluntarily asked for by a property owner. So all in all, the intent behind that, the lot consolidation process, is to create a streamlined process that it helps encourage developments, and especially for any of those types of developments that are otherwise ministerially approved, so that they don't have to go through a hearing process just to merge properties to facilitate a project otherwise allowed by right. So the other topic that we're addressing tonight is SB 35, streamline review and eligibility process. Attachment 2 to your staff report provides kind of an overview of that as a refresher. This is a law that's been on the books for quite some time, since 2017, or well, effective 2018 in January. But since that time, the city has not experienced any requests for a development proposal under SB 35, and that's probably because of the very strict criteria that is necessary to process one of those. First and foremost, you have the affordability requirement. At least 50% of the units have to be low income. And then you have the locational criteria, excuse me for a second, which, basically it restricts them to be within any kind of environmental conservation areas or other natural hazard areas, typically, coastal zones, prime farmland, wetlands, high fire hazard severity zones, hazardous waste sites, earthquake fault zones, floodplains, habitat protected areas, conservation easements, and the like. The other requirement is must be located on a legal parcel within an area that allows residential uses. And then this is one of those legislation that really reinforced the need for objective standards. And so in order for it to be eligible for this streamlined review, they have to meet those objective standards and not deviate from them. And then one of the other probably challenges for private developers is the prevailing wage and also the skilled trained workforce provisions that are required for these types of projects. There's a number of other kind of processes, such as we do require notification to the California Native American tribes, as well as limitations on impacting historic resources or demolition of existing housing units that have been occupied or any kind of affordable housing. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what the government code already says. And essentially the code before you is just reiteration of that code section, all the while knowing that these code sections are being revised almost annually. So just quick, the three components of the code amendment again, we're amending Chapter 3, the subdivision section under planning and zoning to add a new section 9-3.128 for voluntary lot mergers, as well as text amendments to Chapter 10 to add to Article 8, incentives for lot consolidation for affordable housing, and then the text amendments, as I just went over, for allowing ministerial review of qualifying affordable housing projects as required under SB 35. So I've already kind of gone over the section of the MAP Act that gives the city authority by ordinance to create the voluntary lot merger. However, embedded in the ordinance, there are a variety of standards of approval related to the compliance with the Subdivision MAP Act, such that the minimum zoning, there's required access requirements, and then there's no impacts to other properties adjacent, as well as any improvement agreements or existing easements on the property. The process that is being proposed is essentially, yes, a ministerial process, not unlike the certificate of compliance process that we currently have with the city. That is a process that's done through the Community Development Department in coordination with Public Works for the review of the technical documents that ultimately need to be recorded, whether it's the legal description or the legal plat. But that is essentially a process approved by the Community Development Director based on the technical review by the city engineer, their designee. So also within the proposed ordinance, voluntary lot mergers are ministerial unless they are combined with another discretionary action. And to the right of the screen here, you have actually an example of one that recently came to the commission, which was the Rolling Oaks Cancer Center. So that included a lot merger. It was required to go through a discretionary review. But even if it was ministerial at that time, it would have been combined with that entitlement that went before the Planning Commission. Also, as far as the voluntary lot mergers, you have the standards that are necessary for it to be a ministerial approval, but then there's also means for a conditional approval that is allowed to be done by the Community Development Director. And that's basically anything that would condition the project that needs to be satisfied prior to recordation, whether that could be anything related to general plan policies, zoning requirements, or any other kind of zoning or improvement requirements. So the benefits of all of this is basically no public hearing, notification ends up being more cost-effective for the property owners, and it really just helps facilitate land assemblage for development. So now we're going to move on to the incentives for lot consolidation. And first and foremost, just want to kind of cover the eligibility for these incentives. First and foremost, it would have to involve a voluntary lot merger process. Second of all, it would have to meet one of two of the criteria I'm about to go over regarding the location and affordability. First, it would have to be a housing inventory site and construct at a minimum the number of residential units at the level of affordability identified in the housing element, Appendix C. And to your right there is actually an excerpt from the housing sites inventory, and you essentially have a color-coded common ownership of properties that would otherwise be merged and be eligible potentially to go through the voluntary merger and then qualify for these incentives if they are providing that level of affordability and number of units. The second option, again, to actually allow more flexibility other than just the housing sites, is for any mixed use overlay zone, or multiple family or R3 zone site. And in order for those sites to qualify, they would have to provide a minimum of 20% of the units in the lower income households for rental projects. And then for any kind of for sale or ownership projects, they would have to provide a minimum of 20% of the units in the moderate income households. So those would be the kind of the two locational and affordability criteria to even qualify in conjunction with lot consolidation for the incentives I'm about to go over. So the incentives for affordable housing with lot consolidation are kind of in four main buckets. I mean, the first is fairly straightforward. Processing, we would basically relax or not impose any fees for a pre-application. The applicant can come forward and solicit feedback from the city as far as their design in terms of the technical requirements from other departments, as well as a first blush review of the proposal and how it meets the standards and potentially the incentives being offered here. Second would be some flexibility as far as the location. So this would allow, let's just say, a housing element inventory site and maybe an adjacent multifamily or mixed-use site to be combined together for the purposes of these incentives. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be a housing site or a combination of housing sites in combination together, or a standalone mixed-use site or R3 property. It could be a combination of the two. And then quickly, and I'll go over in more detail, we'll have development standard incentives. Basically, they are reducing or waiving certain mixed-use standards, since that's the bulk of where the housing is going to go. That would help facilitate the housing while still maintaining the built form intended by the zoning district and the general plan. But then also allowing R3 properties the ability to utilize the mixed-use standards, either as they are written today or otherwise modified by this ordinance. And then the last would be some reduction of objective design standards, and those are based on some project review, projects that have been recently processed through the city, mainly to reduce the minimum courtyard areas, as well as waive some of the limitation on the unit types that are in projects. So the first development standard incentive would be the mixed-use zone currently has a 50-foot height requirement. If it's a standalone mixed-use site and surrounded by mixed use, it's just 50 feet. However, if you are abutting a residential zone, then you have a series of step backs that are required. Currently in the mixed-use zone, no matter whether it's the rear yard or the side yard, there's a 20-foot setback to begin with. And then from that point, you will have a series of step backs. 30 feet from the property line will be a 25-foot maximum. 30 to 50 feet would have a 45-foot maximum, and over 50 feet from the property line would have a 50-foot maximum. What the incentive is that because in staff's review, R3 properties actually don't even have that huge of a setback. And generally what we're anticipating to see is really mixed use up against mixed use, or residential up against residential in these cases. So the provision for a 20-foot setback seemed a little bit too restrictive on site development, especially on smaller sites when you're on adjacencies with side yard to side yard. So the incentive is basically to carry over the same kind of step back formula, but just reduce the side yard setback to 10 feet. And so here, I just have a kind of a quick example. This, what you have on the left-hand side is actually an excerpt from the Thousand Oaks Boulevard specific plan. It is essentially the same setback and height criteria that is applied to the mixed-use zones. What I have on the right-hand side is basically the new dimensions that would apply to a reduced side yard setback. Rear yard setbacks still remain the same. So if you were looking at the rear yard, the image on the left is what you would apply. If you're applying it to the side yard, then the image on the right is what's being applied. And then there's several other kind of development standards that are really kind of associated with mixed-use type developments, so typically with ground floor commercial, but also in terms of allowing a little bit more flexibility with the building form. If a project qualifies for these, under these standards, they would waive that third floor step back. Currently in the mixed-use zone, it's a 10-foot average from the first floor street front building facade. So, portions of the building could be 10 feet or greater, but you could still have portions of the building at a three-story facade. So we would basically waive that, so it'll allow a little bit more flexibility in accommodating the units. Some of the other things would be a reduction in the amount of window glazing on the ground floor, reduced by 10%, but then also waiving the ground floor plate height minimum of 14 feet. And that rule is basically there to facilitate storefronts. And our anticipation is that any project that's going to qualify for these incentives is more than likely going to be 100% commercial, residential. Thank you. And then the other waiver is just the public exterior space, which is 3% of the building footprint. Real quickly, so there is a slight incentive in terms of parking. R3 and mixed-use standards are essentially the same, with the exception of mixed use does not require a covered space per unit. So any project going forward, especially anything in an R3 zone, would have the benefit of using the mixed-use parking standards and not necessarily have to require covered parking. So moving on to the objective design standard incentives, these would apply to the typical building types that you would see, kind of the higher density housing within the courtyard, the stacked dwelling, and the mixed-use block. We have incentivized standards reducing the courtyard area by 5%, so it could be 10% of the lot area. There's also reducing the minimum courtyard dimensions by 10 feet. And then waiving that limitation on 50% of the units can only be in a stacked dwelling type. And as mentioned in the staff report, and I'll kind of walk you through just quickly, there's 2 recent projects that went through the 1730 Los Feliz apartment project, as well as the 2150 Hillcrest specific plan, of which kind of requested modifications from those standards. So again, specifically, this is what the incentive is. You got a 10% of the lot area that needs to be dedicated to courtyard as a minimum, as opposed to 15, and then a reduction of the courtyard dimensions. And I won't read through all of that, but the courtyard dimensions are kind of predicated on how it aligns east-west versus north-south. But just for example, the Los Feliz Apartments project, they reduced their courtyard area from 15% to 3.9% of the lot area. This was a relatively small site, long and narrow though, so it was probably fairly hard to achieve the densities that were intended for the site and still meet those objective design standards. Also, they decreased the courtyard dimension by 4 feet. So here's just kind of little visual representation of what was approved as part of some reductions to those. Next, as far as another minimum courtyard dimension, is the proportion of the width of the courtyard relative to the adjacent building. Currently, it's a 1-to-1 proportion of the horizontal distance of the courtyard when it relates to the height of the building. The incentive would be allowed the higher building heights adjacent to these courtyards, a 1-to-2 proportion. And then, as mentioned before, allowing up to 100% of the units in the project to be a stacked dwelling building type. And just to actually quickly summarize that, the image up below here, the stacked dwelling building type is typically that interior double-loaded corridor housing type. And the original intent of the objective design standards was to create a variety of housing types in the projects. However, most of the projects that we have seen have asked for some type of waiver from requiring other means of accessing units. So the double-loaded corridor has been, for the most part, utilized in most of the projects that have been brought forward. So actually going back to, again, courtyard dimensions, the Latigo Hillcrest specific plan. Now, they did a specific plan, but through that specific plan, it was evaluated against the objective design standards, but they modified the standards to meet their design needs. And in so, yes, they asked for modification to those courtyard dimensions, the 40 and the 30-foot dimension, as well as certain portions as highlighted here on the site plan the building heights exceeded that 1-to-1 ratio in relation to the courtyard width. All right, so I'm now moving on to the last and third component of the code amendment. This is fairly straightforward, but essentially it's just acknowledging the streamlined review process through the code amendment. Again, it's for those projects that meet that government code section 65913.4. At least 50% of the units have to be affordable, and it's still subject to, objective design standards as well as all the other criteria under the government code, and would be subject to all our municipal code requirements as well as other standing operation procedures, and really just have to request the issuance of a building permit and the payment of the fees. So the code amendment essentially acknowledges it in our code, but then there is follow-through from staff in terms of developing the application and any other kind of informational and procedural requirements that will be assisting any prospective applicants in that regard. And that's something that we would be putting together administratively anyways. And I may just like to mention in the research, actually a lot of cities don't even amend their code. They just have a page on their website that basically dedicates to the process itself. But, in terms of just going through our housing element implementation and checking those boxes, this was a good way of at least acknowledging it. I mean, other jurisdictions in the county have done it in their code, but a lot throughout California have not. All right, all in all, the code amendments before you, consistent with our primary goal, LU1 of the general plan, in terms of, creating land use patterns that of development that preserve the existing neighborhoods and also provide opportunities for housing and targeted infill. Policy 1.1, the overall city structure, basically discusses establishing a clearly defined urban pattern of development and open space. And I've just highlighted a couple of the bullet points there under Policy 1.1 that have to do with streamlining infill multifamily housing as well as mixed-use projects. Also under Goal LU4, which is basically the creation of safe, affordable, and sanitary housing for all ages, income levels, and abilities. It's just another means to incentivize and increase our housing stock. Also under Goal LU8, support high quality and visually interesting design and construction of all buildings throughout the city. Actually, under that goal, there is a whole lot consolidation policy to really help encourage small parcels to be assembled for the purposes of creating a more cohesive design throughout the city. So, in conclusion, amending the code allows the city to continue reporting to HCD that the housing element is being implemented in a timely fashion, which is essential for maintaining the city's housing element certification. The proposed ordinance update will support and incentivize affordable housing development by creating additional housing opportunities and also help the city meet its RHNA obligation, while establishing incentives for development standards that are consistent with general plan policies. So with that, staff's recommendation is for the Planning Commission to adopt the resolution for you in attachment 1. Find that pursuant to sections 15183 of the California Environmental Quality Act, as well as section 15168C5, C2 and 5, that no further environmental document is necessary because the proposed actions are consistent with the city's goals, policies, and anticipated programs contained within the adopted general plan and the housing element, which were all covered under our certified program EIR. Also, we recommend to the City Council adoption of the Municipal Code Amendment to implement the city's 2021-2029 housing element. And that would conclude my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Holt and Ms. Rice, for the presentation. It seems both with our general plan amendment update and the state, we're constantly trying to update our code and make sure everything is as clear as possible. Questions from commissioners? Commissioner McMahon?
Yes, if I understood it correctly, when we were doing
the design objectives, the whole idea was not to have big blocky buildings, and you had the articulations, and you had setbacks at different levels, and you had it so that it wasn't a big plane. And now it seems like we're moving more towards the big boxy facade that we were trying to avoid. Are you concerned about that at all?
Well, honestly, I would say no. I mean, the incentives still require the step backs, albeit and the one incentive is a reduced setback from 20 to 10 feet, but those step backs would still be applied. The other objective standards regarding the length of buildings and how those lengths are broken up through facade articulation still stand. So those would still remain applicable to projects as well. I mean, the other incentive, in terms of the third floor step back, when you look at it in implementation, I mean, you can still have a facade of 3 stories. It would just be that some portions would be step back. So, and again, the other objective standards regarding facade articulation, depending on the width of the building, would still apply in that event. So I would think that in application of the objective standards that are still on the books, in combination with the incentives, we would still maintain a variety of massing and building form out there.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner Ferris?
Thank you. Thanks for entertaining some of my questions that I had forwarded over the weekend. I did want to see if I can maybe just get you've mentioned it either in the oral presentation or it's in the packet or in the presentation, slide presentation. I just want to kind of clarify some things in my head. So for the ministerial approval process of lot consolidation, that would effectively be in cases to where they come forward and that's really, in some ways, that's the only thing that they have. It doesn't require any other conditional use or discretionary approvals by the council, for example. If they were to ask for a lot consolidation and it required a zone change, it would be packaged together with it, run concurrently, and gone through the standard process that we normally have. Is that right?
Correct. I mean,
Okay.
if a proposal included the lot merger, but in combination with any other kind of discretionary action, the lot merger would carry forward with that discretionary action. And if it required a legislative act,
Right.
That legislative act would have to go towards, through the planning commission and obviously up to the city council ultimately.
Okay. I want to be clear. Like, it's written in here. It was said before. I just wanted to clarify it just to make sure, because it is one of those things of that's a ministerial thing the public doesn't know about, but if it's consolidated with something that normally would go through our hearing process, it would be packaged in with it. One of those sort of legislative acts, and I'm trying to understand the nature of some of the areas that we have, like in SP, specific Plan 20, we have a lot of high residential density and mixed use kind of next to each other. Can 2 lots that have different general plan designations in different zones be combined into 1 lot and then not have to have a general plan or zone change for a project to comply with that kind of mixed applied zoning on the same parcel? Or would that require consistency of the general plan designation and the zoning on the parcel?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think under the example you give, where if it's a mixed-use designation next to a residential high designation, let's say from a land use perspective, and then you have a corresponding R3 zone and a mixed-use zone, I mean, if it's one of these projects that's coming in, merging one of those properties, the R3 property would have the benefit of the mixed-use zoning standards. So arguably, there would not need necessarily to process a project through and change the zoning for the property, because the R3, I mean, and I think this is where, because the R3 is comparable to the mixed use in terms of density and building height. So from a general plan standpoint, there's some consistency there. I think where, if you were to go to a different scenario where it's industrial and residential, then that kind of draws the question of, okay, what are we doing here? And I think that's part of the process of why you have that conditional approval to a voluntary lot merger. I mean, someone can merge a property, but they may not be able to do anything until, I mean, each case is different. So we're going to have to, the community development director is going to have to look at that and determine, okay, do we have a conflict here with the general plan policy of combining these properties? And if someone comes in with a lot merger and they don't have a plan to develop it, then, well, I mean, we could still go through the voluntary merger process, but then it would be conditional, and they wouldn't necessarily be able to record it until such time that that condition was satisfied. So anyways, I hope
If I
that
may,
kind of
Chair.
answers your
Sorry to
question.
No, and Commissioner Ferris, I mean.
We have conditions like this in the city, so I just
Sure,
wanted to
sure.
understand.
And I think what Planner Holt is saying, and I agree with him, is that we are looking in this code section for flexibility, right? And so when you have these very simple lot mergers that we want to incentivize to have developers think about taking some of these small lots and merging them together to put affordable housing on it, right? Which would be one of the incentives. What we get out of it is, 20% affordable or something of that nature. There's always got to be that requirement that you have that vertical consistency with the general plan, right? So you start with the general plan, as we all know, and then you make sure that anything you're doing below that, whether it's element or whether it's specific plan, et cetera, is got to be to have that consistency. And so I think when you look at 9-3.1218 and its subdivision H, it shows that the director is the advisory agency, right? That director initially would have to look at that element to say, okay, do we have any issues here, like consistency? And then you would have to explore, is it something that you have a R3 and a mixed use, so maybe you don't have that concern, versus something different? And we can go through, obviously, a number of hypotheticals, but I think what is important tonight is that we are doing an ordinance that has that built into the flexibility, where you initially would look at it and say, obviously, we have to have that consistency. You have to make that finding, and the director would do that initially. And if it is something that says, whoa, yellow or red light here, let's look at this a little bit more closely. As Mr. Holt mentioned, you would have these next steps where there's conditions, or it has to be something even more drastic or more thorough to be brought to the Planning Commission or City Council for that kind of thing. So I think that kind of gets to your point, which is we are going to be looking at that. I think the ordinance does put that into play. It's not very specific with every hypothetical possibility on purpose, so we have that flexibility. And then obviously, we're going to have those points to make sure that we have that consistency, as we always have to make those findings when we bring something for land use, as far as bringing it either in front of the director or in front of you.
If, maybe to make it cleaner in this spirit, let's say that somebody did have common ownership of it, it straddled some general plan and zoning things, they could always, my question, I guess, would be, if they were to just step back and go, look, I just want to take my two lots, I just want to consolidate it, they're going to have split general plan and zoning designations on it. Is there any, can they do that? And would that be a successful thing? Can a parcel, the way we
I
handle
think
it,
the issue would
split
be
across
that
general
they
plan?
couldn't do it in the sense of they couldn't fulfill it and have it completed, because they would have to record it. We would not allow that recording until we had that finding of consistency, right? And I think that's the stopgap that you have in subdivision H, for example, is that the director would look at that and say, okay, either there's going to be conditions on there before you can record, you must do these things, whatever those actions would have to be, or you better do it ahead of time. I think in reality, though, I think that most cases we're going to have this very similar, with one ownership, we're going to have very similar type of residential lots, for example. And so we're not going to really see those. We don't anticipate that we're going to see those kind of situations happen too often, but we have this flexible kind of review process to ensure that if it is something that happens like that in hypothetical, we have the process to go and evaluate that to ensure at the end of the day, before it's recorded, we have that consistency. And that might mean some action that is more costly for that person. But again, I think overall we're trying to capture this, let's get some more lots merged, some small lots merged, so we can put more affordable housing on that with a incentivized process.
Okay. Let me just ask one more question to see if any of the other commissioners have anything to ask. So for the SB 35 consistency, we're referencing Government Code 65913.4. It was listed in the attachment for our packet, and you referenced it in your verbal description, but it wasn't on the slide. But is one of those conditions that they would qualify for the streamlining is that it does not demolish historic structures on national, state, or local historic registers?
Yes, that is correct. I think I very quickly noted that as I kind of rattled through the criteria. But yes, it cannot demolish a designated historic.
Perfect. It just wasn't on the slide, so I just wanted to kind of
Yeah.
confirm that as one of the...
It's in attachment 2.
Yes, absolutely. Then on what qualifies for SB 30 under our thing is, it says that 50% or more of the units have to be for lower income. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Is that under the base units that would be allowed? Like, how's the calculation kind of work? Because, as I'm going to have some questions a little bit later, we have been experiencing a lot of the stacking of all of these incentives and things. So I just wanted to have an understanding of how that would be treated.
Excuse me for a moment.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, I mean, so yes, this provision can be used in combination with the state density bonus law. So, yeah, I would say then, yeah, so projects that use state density bonus program and meet all the other eligibility requirements under SB 35 streamlining can utilize the state density bonus law. So then they can ask for, any waivers, concessions, incentives through state density bonus law. So with state density bonus law, then yeah, the 50% would apply to whatever the density is. Like, so if it's 30 units to the acre, half of the units at that density range would have to be.
So basically at the base level, right? Whenever
Yes,
we're doing the
the base level.
calculations, that helps them understand what they can get under the state bonus law. But if it is 50% or more, they qualify for ministerial processing effectively.
Correct.
Okay. I just wanted to get a sense of where that was. Let me pause and allow others to do. I have a few more, but
Actually, I wanted to kind of clarify and follow up on your question as to where I thought you were going was a comment saying, well, can somebody just go ahead and do this? And again, I deal with lot lines all the time, and I thought your question was, do people have to go through the city to get this lot line or lot merger done, or can they skip that and go straight to the county? And the question being, if they do that, obviously they don't get the benefits of this process.
Correct. And that's why, I mean, we still do lot mergers here at the city. I mean, ultimately, the recordation process occurs over at the county. It's just that currently it's done through the parcel map waiver application process, which requires a hearing. So it's still a city permit approval, albeit as recommended here, a ministerial approval. But essentially, we oversee the process, ensure that the documents are, adequate for and legally, meet all the legal requirements for recordation. So,
That's why I just wanted to make it clear that somebody can't just ignore the city process and go straight to the county. I've known that's where you were going.
oh, no, not at all. I think the fact is, as Mr. Holt was saying, like, we currently have a process someone can ask for. It's a parcel waiver process. It goes through hearing, notification. That is being asked to be ministerial. That's what we're moving to do, unless it's tied with other things that have to go through process. Is that a correct assessment?
yeah, I think we kind of jumped around a little bit. I mean, because SB 35 is
That's
its
a whole
own thing.
separate thing.
Yeah, so
Right, and
But-
Chair, I want to, and to all the commissioners and the public, of course, I do want to emphasize, as Mr. Holt said earlier in his presentation, that with SB 35, what we are doing is we're codifying basically a state process. It is what it is, but it is also significant to note that not only do they have to do the 50% affordable, but they have to do prevailing wage, they have to do work labor force, and there's many aspects of SB 35 that a developer will have to meet, and that's why they're in a city of, of our size, and it's just not going to be commonplace. It's got to be something challenging for a developer to do. Again, these are obviously state incentives that they have really pushed hard to again, for the whole theme of creating more housing. But in this particular one, the SB 35, it is one, state-driven, and two, there are a number of factors besides the 50% affordable that they have to meet, and that makes it a little bit costlier, if you will.
So I just have a few follow-up questions, just to understand some stuff. Obviously, as Mr. Here is saying, this is a state process trying to kind of push the issue, and oftentimes we have to kind of deal with things later on. Like I said, I deal with lot line adjustments, and what's not in here is issues that the individual property owner is going to have to deal with as to whether it invalidates your title insurance, property reassessment, lots of other things that we have nothing to do with that they have to make sure they understand. But one thing that I did want to go through, you indicated at some point that part of the review process is to make sure there's no impact on existing easements. Is that something the city is doing as part of that evaluation?
Correct. So, when we receive an application, obviously, we would get, title reports and any grant or easement documents, grant deeds, what have you, associated with the property and evaluate that, because what we don't want is through the consolidation, you are, precluding access through the site to another site, or, impacting, well, clearly any public utility easements, but then also recognizing the need to maintain any private easements if necessary.
So
for
we're
purposes of
identifying
property.
the issue. It's up to the property owner to resolve that issue to the extent the title company may have a problem or whatever, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Okay. That we're going through this process now, I'm assuming this is not retroactive, that it goes forward from this point forward. So are there any projects that have been passed, and again, we've referred to some of these, that would have to be reevaluated now as part of these new requirements, if that would apply?
No, not really. I think it's just, it just includes a degree of specificity that wasn't codified before. And so, and again, in developing the criteria that I think, you're reading through and everything, work closely with our land surveyor as well as the county surveying department, of which this ordinance somewhat mimics in terms of the process and so forth. So we did have discussions with them about, the requirements, because, who's listed on the title, who actually has to sign the application, because, the title holder is not necessarily the person living there, or, who so-called owns the property. So there's a lot of different documentation that's required up front in order to proceed forward.
And I'm seeing in my own private thing, title companies becoming a lot more aggressive in terms of making sure things are accurate. So that's going to be a burden on them to deal with if that goes that way. That's all the questions I had. Any more questions over here? Commissioner Ferris, did you have any more? Oh, Vice Chair Link.
There was some discussion when we talked about the 14-foot ground floor plate height, and I just wanted to clarify for my own edification. Does that mean that potentially we could have 100% residential developments within mixed-use zones?
Well, yes, that's allowed regardless of these
okay.
incentives. So, but right now, the code reads that the first floor would have to have a ceiling plate of 14 feet. And that's, for the most part, a carryover from generally a mixed-use standard where you have ground floor commercial uses.
Understood. Okay. And then I think one of the things that my fellow commissioners and I have bemoaned, especially with regard to affordable housing, is the reduction in the amount of outdoor space, whether it's balconies or commons area. Are our expectations too high? Are we being unrealistic with the amount of space that we are thinking of? Because we're going from 15 and then down to 10.
Well, that is a good question, and I think, I gave you two project examples where they were asking for reductions. There was other maybe compensating features in terms of, open space or other kind of common areas that didn't necessarily meet the letter of the law. And that's actually part of what we're going to be addressing through the comprehensive code update, because, upon the adoption of the objective design standards that we have today, we have seen projects come forward, and generally they are asking for a modification of sorts in one way or another regardless. So, when we do the comprehensive code update, that's something that's going to be reevaluated as far as, okay, what really works. And so we don't necessarily have to take a project like 1730 Los Feliz with 15 modifications to the objective design standards, or I forget what it was, but it was quite a lot.
I mean, I wonder just because obviously common space doesn't generate rent. So it's the reason why a developer would want to push away from that standard. But at the same time, we also know that there are benefits for having common space or recreation area to the residents. It helps with happiness and depression and various other things. So I don't know whether we should be pushing back in the other direction as opposed to letting the developers push on us.
Well, and those are conversations that we're going to be having as we go through the municipal code update and soliciting public feedback as far as, okay, where is that happy middle ground?
Makes sense. And then lastly, and I apologize if it's written in there and I haven't seen it, but is there a minimum lot size with regard to this? I know the SB 9 does, or there are some requirements, or is it just a minimum number of housing units for consolidation?
SB 9? Or
SB 9, well, no, SB 9, I think there's a minimum lot size for when you combine them and then redevelop it or something like that. But is there, with SB 35, is there a minimum lot size?
Oh, with SB 35, no. SB 35 applies to anything of 2 units or greater.
Okay, so as long as you
But the assumption is that, okay, if you do 2 units, one of them has to be affordable, and you have to go through that rigorous process in government code. So it's highly unlikely, but it's meant to be available to multifamily of all scales.
So as long as you can squeeze 2 units on there, it's good to go.
And meets all the other criteria.
It meets all the other criteria. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Ferris?
Thanks. So for the incentives that we have for the lot consolidation, that's intended as a city demonstration to abide by what we have in our housing element, which sort of says we want to eliminate the process of discretionary lot consolidation process and provide incentives for mixed use and multifamily dwellings. Is that the intent of the incentive portion of this?
The intent is to facilitate housing on the housing sites identified in the housing element, and as well as incentivizing housing in the mixed use and other multifamily areas.
Okay.
The fact that it is a ministerial process for the lot merger doesn't necessarily, as I think per your previous question, assume that everything is going to be a ministerial process. I mean, there's always, if it's a mixed use zone and even if it qualifies because of the affordability and everything, it may still require a development permit that has to go to Planning Commission, but it's just at that point still eligible for the incentives that are before you.
Would it be fair to say that, like, that there is already, I know we're going to, considering particular waivers or reductions in our own standards as part of the program, but inherently merging 2 lots already provides an incentive to get more out of the property than you would if it had those 2 individually, because you're removing setbacks in the middle of the property. It gives you greater flexibility to do that. That's, at a minimum, the lot consolidation helps with that process. Is that a fair read of the benefits of lot consolidation?
Certainly.
Okay.
You have less constraints on the building envelope because the property size has increased.
And we have a lot of these sort of narrow but long lots, and this would probably help to provide a lot. And that's the intent, not only in our housing element, but the program to implement it, right?
Certainly. We
Okay.
get proposals in on very small lots in the high density range, and they can't fit the parking, or it's until you start assembling properties, then you can actually see accommodation of projects that actually can meet our standards better.
And so with respect to the package that we have in front of us of potential incentives, let me just mention, I have some hesitation, share some concerns, as Commissioner McMahon has mentioned, sort of about what the objective design standards have intended, what they're in place to be able to do, and what will, the incentive packages sort of going back on some of those things. And also some of the shared experiences that I've had over the past couple of years here with the state density bonus law and what SB 20 allows you to account for units without it actually being part of the density. And then there's the equations of how many units we get. We recently had a project in which the 500 Thousand Oaks Boulevard project, we had 328 units on roughly 6 acres, 30 units per acre density that resulted in a project that had 54 units per acre because of all of the stacking. And they had 3 state concessions of building height, building window details, and retail frontages, 4 additional waivers on setbacks and design and courtyards and building access, 3 additional modifications for building massing, articulation, open space requirements. They went through and had to get a protected tree permit for 22 trees and of removal and reduce for encroachment to 6 more. And I'm worried about how much we're also allowing that to be waived before we even get into what the stacking of all of these things come in. So how robust of a package must this be for us to be able to put this forward? I guess I'm having some reservations on some of the elements of the package. Others I don't, but I just wanted to get a sense of why this particular size of request that we're asking to waive from standards.
Well, I think a lot of the waivers, so there are reductions and then there are waivers as part of the proposal before you tonight. And the waivers are, in staff's view, items that are at expense to what otherwise would be 100% residential project, the higher ceiling plate, the first floor, but also in looking at how properties develop, even multifamily properties, the mixed-use zone standards that were carried forward, really are kind of representative of a time when, separation and, between uses was like, we're really looking at an infill strategy where, mixed use up against residential, they're, fairly similar uses. And so, because mixed use is, predominantly the housing strategy going forward.
That's helpful in understanding what we're looking for here, but I guess
at the end of the day, people, if you qualify for any of these incentives, you're probably asking for a density bonus anyway. So, and in looking at the types of design that we have, whether it's the 1730, apartments, that's a 10-foot setback with a sheer 3-story building at that 10-foot setback. There's no step back in that. But that was found to be acceptable. And so when staff looks at projects such as that, and when you compare it to the mixed-use standards, it's kind of like, well, what are we gaining by having this extra setback on a mixed-use zone when even pure residential projects on an R3 property, are allowed, building facades of a much higher, or, at 3 stories without an actual step back. We're still requiring a step back above 2 stories. At the 20-foot, 5-foot mark, it has to be step back. And then at 45 feet, it has to be step back again. So I think the building massing articulation still remains as part of the mixed use proposal before you.
Isn't the 3rd floor setback minimum waived under this incentive?
Well, I was referring to the side and rear yard. I think you're referring to the front yard. And that's not a full setback. That just has to mean that the 3rd floor has to be set back on an average of 10 feet. So you can still have a 3-story facade right at the setback line. Actually, 1710 Thousand Oaks Boulevard is an example of that. I think, well, actually what they just did is just put everything back at 10 feet. But I believe other project designs I've seen, facade at 3 stories, and then maybe have some of it a little bit further back. So.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much for just, the insight into this. We'll see if there are any questions, other discussion. Thank you.
Any other questions? Just to follow it from me, so based on that conversation, I think the difficulty I have, obviously, is everything what's been mentioned in terms of what we're being forced to do, in some sense, by a lot of the state mandate requirements things. And again, Commissioner Ferris points out some concerns, and Vice Chair Link as well, Commissioner McMahon as well, about things that we don't necessarily love the idea of. The question being, it makes it sound as if we have a lot more control over a lot of the overall areas of how to implement this. So I guess, explain that to me, what we have to do and what is within our discretion.
Well, as far as the program goes, the direction is to provide incentives that allow flexibility in the site design or in the building design. And staff looked at, the standards we have in the mixed use as well as the objective standards, and there's a lot of other standards that have been changed through processes and so forth. We felt that this was kind of a good medium ground, because in terms, we have to submit this to HCD. We didn't really, have a conversation with them about, is this acceptable at this point in time? But we feel that this is kind of meeting that middle ground, knowing that even if we didn't provide this incentive, it would be likely that there would be some sort of modification through the density bonus allowances in any case. Because I would say that most projects that would qualify, especially at some of the income levels identified in our housing element, they would have to ask for a density bonus just to make those pencil. And same goes for the other criteria with the 20% low income.
So without going item by item, it's making it sound as if staff is indicating that areas that there was discretion, you did things according to giving us the best flexibility, but obviously something that HCD would find appropriate and approve.
Yes, we have to provide some level of incentive, and I don't know what that magic number is. I don't think none of us really do. But if there was, something that is before you tonight, that's, creating consternation amongst the commission as a whole in terms of, the incentives, that is something that, we could take upon as a recommendation moving forward to the city council.
Okay. I think that might raise some questions, Vice Chair Link.
So a follow-up question to that, what are the chances that HCD reviews our incentives and modifies them so that they are even more restrictive than what we are currently proposing?
Well, I don't know, but we do have to submit this to HCD, so I guess we'll find out.
Should we err on the high side then and
Well,
let
and
them talk us down?
that was the mindset I went into this, is kind of, a little bit of middle ground.
Because we could
wasn't
be
necessarily anticipating, changes at this level, but again, if there is something that you feel needs not to be an incentive in order to kind of maintain continuity on how we apply things to projects, then I think that is fine. We can't just do it wholesale, right?
Right. No, I'd be worried that we're now looking at 5% outdoor space as opposed to 10.
Well, the incentive is a reduction, from 15 to 10, so.
Right, but then HCD could say, no, 5 is fine. Maybe, maybe not.
Any other questions?
No.
Commissioner McMahon?
So are you saying that if we did not want to waive the 10-foot average from first floor street front building facade, we could not waive that part of it?
That is, that is a recommendation that the, planning commission could take forward, and it would be, forwarded on to the city council for consideration, and, staff would look at it and,
Okay, thank you.
So Chair and Commissioner McMahon, since you started this with that first question, right? And I do want to emphasize that with staff, when they're looking at balancing these incentives, right? They're looking at ones from our history that we've had and projects that have been definite asks for the developers, right? Commissioner Link, you made a comment about, things cost money, like parking, for example, and obviously with the density bonuses that you see with affordable requirements from the state, parking is a big one, right? They just say, we knock it more and more and more, and this incentive is, I think, no covered parking as an example, because that's money, right? So I think what staff was doing with this is trying to create a balance of looking at our projects that we've had over the last few years and say, okay, what have been some key ones that, in staff's view, make it an incentive because it's cost savings, right? But it's not so drastic, in their opinion, of course, and that loses the ability for the architectural details that you just mentioned at the beginning, right? We're trying to ensure that we have some of that, the 200-foot example, or the articulation, the facades and things of that nature. And so that's where I think staff was going with it, is the recommendation was based upon that philosophy of, okay, what have we done in the past? What have been some key requests from developers to ensure that they can build it, but they need something to help them affordable, some affordable component to it. And again, it's just a balancing thing, as Mr. Ian Holt has said, is just you're balancing, trying to figure out what makes sense that we can present as incentives. Again, the goal is, the policy is we want to provide incentives for some of these lot mergers to have them consider buying the properties and having one ownership and then doing this process, right? And so it's that kind of element of to it. And where do you draw the line? It's hard, but I think the shot was from staff was to try to balance that and look at some of the history that we had that weren't so drastic as to make it, like you said, we now result in a block building, right? We're trying to avoid that, obviously.
So they're still getting a lot of benefits. I mean, they're going to have a bigger property. They're going to have setbacks that are relaxed from before. They're going to have the 3% of area building footprint waived. There's a lot of other benefits they're getting. And the main benefit they're getting is it's just going to be through the city. There's not going to be a hearing and all that stuff. And the fees are going to be less. So there's an incentive already. That's just what I'm thinking.
Other questions? And I guess just to follow up on that, there's no roadmap as to exactly the nature and extent of the incentives that would make the process agreeable. They haven't provided that kind of roadmap, so are you basically taking a dart and trying to figure out exactly what would be acceptable?
Yeah, there hasn't been a lot of, no, there's no real roadmap. But I think, one thing, the criteria to meet these incentives is extremely high. Albeit, okay, a voluntary lot merger, that's an easy one. Meeting the housing requirements of the housing sites inventory, as you get into those larger sites, yeah, there's a much higher affordability rate than what's even required under inclusionary. And then if you're outside the housing site, even the big projects that have come forward have not, maybe there's one example that's approached 20%. But generally, they're coming in at a lesser percentage and doing the very low, because if you recall what our consultant, when we did the inclusionary housing, was saying is that, even though we have a 10% low requirement in our inclusionary, most developers will opt to do the very low option and seek the density bonus, and not even, don't even have to exceed the 10%. So, the bar is raised really high. And so
I would say still for me, the one thing missing is the elephant in the room, and that's the $1,300 a square foot that it costs to build things, which, that's something we can't obviously end up dealing with. But all right, so it's essentially you're trying to come up with the incentives that would, based on previous actions with HTD, satisfy what they're looking for.
Correct. And I think, in regards to the open space, that space, is every space occupied by a courtyard is less space for a unit. However, Some of the projects that we've seen, they may have not met the letter in terms of the actual dimensional criteria, but there's a variety of alternatives that they provide, whether it's indoor community rooms or exercise rooms and other kind of terraces that they may not necessarily meet certain dimensions, but, it allows some flexibility in terms of providing some of those open spaces. And plus, we're looking at, the mixed-use areas, which are predominantly on our commercial corridors and, ideally going to ultimately be walkable areas. So,
Let me ask you again a question that I'm assuming you're going to say I have no idea, but let me ask it anyway. When we submit this, say it gets approved and goes through the process and HC looks at it, is it a item-by-item evaluation as turned in the incentive, or is it a totality of the circumstance type evaluation? I told you were going to say I have no idea.
yeah, I have no idea. I mean, I think that,
Okay. Again,
it
just
depends on their workload. I think they're going to look at it holistically. I mean, tongue in cheek, but I mean, they do go down and they will look at very specific criteria too.
well, and
but-
again, our housing element took a number of different submissions to
Mhm.
make sure we went through that process. So I'm assuming that's the same process
Yeah,
they would
and
use
that's
again.
why when they learned that we require a hearing for a lot merger, though, you got to change that.
Okay.
So, and that's,
Okay.
very
Got it.
small detail.
Commissioner McMahon?
So I want to understand what you just said. You're saying that because you're requiring to have so many more affordable home units, that makes it such a harder target for them, that's why you're doing this. And I recognize that in the past, I don't think we've ever had more than 12 or 13% that I can remember of projects that have gone through. So if you're requiring so many more, I can see your point. Don't know if I like it, but I can see it.
All right, any other questions? All right, so anything else, Mr. Heer? No. Okay. Madam Secretary, I don't see that we have any public comments.
No, none.
And unless staff, you want to rebuttal yourself with any further comments? Okay, at that point, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and then open the matter for commissioner discussion and a motion. Commissioner Ferris?
Yeah, I want to discuss a bit to see where the commission can land and where we're in on this. I guess first off, for the ministerial process of lot consolidations, no problem. For the SB 35 streamlining, no problem. I think for me, and for some of the incentives, I think that it's clear we have to have some incentive program for, and then we've laid this out for projects that would have, correct me if I'm mistaken on it, at least 20% at lower income and at least 20% at moderate income to qualify for these lot consolidation incentives. I know we've closed public hearing. Should we open it up again to just make sure staff can respond?
I will move to reopen the public hearing and have an answer to Mr. Ferris's question.
Okay, that is one of the criteria. So if you are a mixed-use zone, mixed-use overlay zone, or R3 zone, not identified in the housing sites inventory, but you're providing 20% of the low income for rental, 20% moderate for the for sale type projects, then you qualify. The other option is you are a housing site identified in the housing element, but you are providing the affordability that's identified in the housing element. So, and that's not just one mixed formula. It depends on the lot size and so forth and how it was allocated. But whatever was allocated in the housing element site, that's what you would have to satisfy to qualify for an incentive.
Okay, so it's in the housing element, the listing of properties at the affordability,
Yeah.
identified affordability.
Yeah.
Or if not, mixed use overlay, R3, and 20% rental and 20% ownership. That's the,
Yeah, low for the rental, mod for the ownership.
and no matter what, they have to be consolidating lots.
Yep.
Okay. And if that's the case, then they qualify for the incentive program as listed.
Yep.
Okay.
First and foremost, they got to merge the lots.
Yep.
Then it could be either of those two location and affordability scenarios.
Okay, that's helpful. I just wanted to get clarity on that.
So I'll reclose the public hearing and open it back
Are you
up to
sure?
commissioner comments.
Okay. I still have some problems with the incentive package. The main thing is, and I think we've sort of highlighted this, there are some things that we absolutely need to do. And I think in the housing element update, the response from HCD was, hey, don't like your discretionary approvals of lot consolidation. You ought to do something there. We're doing that. There's going to, we've identified we're going to have an incentive program to do that. And then the SB 35 stuff is stuff we really need. In some ways, I guess other cities have said, we've got a place on our website, like we'll just do that, but we're going to change the code to kind of make that part of the law. When it comes to some of the incentive programs that we have, I am sort of chastened by some of the experiences we've had of where the project came in with a recommendation of 24% of the base units being lower income. That led to a 30-unit zoning density becoming a 54-unit per acre project when you start stacking all of the incentives and waivers and things that they asked for. And so if through these incentives, we're sort of saying, well, these are the ones that we're going to give you just because of it, they'll ask for the other ones as well. And I'm just trying to get a sense of what are the ones that make sense versus the ones that seem to be just kind of chipping away at the objective or development standards that we have. So,
Would you have a list of those incentives that you would like to change that we could
yeah,
then-
I would,
because otherwise it kind of,
No, exactly. I think that from my perspective, I think the parking is fine. That's a fine enough incentive. I would like to hear Vice Chair Link's thoughts regarding the objective design standards where there's the open space reduction. I am concerned about the third floor setback waiver, and I do share this, like, the aspects of building massing, I think, are things that we're, try to be taken care of as much as we can in the development standards, objective standards, and those, I would want those to be the ones least put into, put into the incentive package unless we feel like that's absolutely necessary. So I am concerned about the side yard setbacks too. I know there's 20 feet, but the picture itself didn't quite give you the sense of how closely that building would move to the property line. It changed the numbers, but it didn't change the perspective of how close that is. And the purposes of those are to sort of relieve the sense of big buildings right next to, us on the street or next door. And I just want to try to figure out if there's a way that we can, curtail that back if we can. So that's effectively my comments for the purposes of discussion.
so there was three things you identified: the open space, third floor waiver, and the side yard setback. Right?
I don't like the building height either, but I mean, ultimately, they're 50 feet, already. in
I'm just trying to
mixed
get
use,
what it is so that we
Yep.
can then,
Yeah, let's go with that. Side yard setback, third floor setback, and open space requirements.
okay, those three things. So any other comments, whether generally or as to the three items that Commissioner Ferris pointed out? Vice Chair Link?
To the extent that you need a PhD in HCD in order to figure this out, and I say good luck to any potential developer that, I'm glad you guys, Mr. Holt and Ms. Rice, were able to figure this out, but I wish I had more than a weekend to figure it out, but that's neither here nor there. I think I still have concerns about the open space requirements, because I think even then, as had been mentioned in discussion, that you will likely need density bonus for any of these projects to pencil out, and we will likely see a reduction. So we would further see reductions to what we think are going to be incentives. And I just think that we would be doing a disservice to the residents by reducing or giving the opportunity to further reduce those objective design standards for courtyard or outdoor space. So again, those would be my only two concerns.
So wait, the open space and what?
the courtyard size, which is the reduction from 15 to 10% of the lot area, and then the exterior space, which is under the mixed-use development standards
Okay.
from 3%,
And what would you prefer?
whatever they are before.
Got it. Okay. Other commissioner comments? Commissioner McMahon?
For the three that Commissioner Ferris have talked about, I can live with the setbacks, the side setbacks, but I agree with Commissioner, oh my God,
Link.
Link. And I also, I think we should at least try to keep the open space. That's always been a problem for me whenever it's been before us and we've waived it. If it comes before us again with a waiver, we can deal with it on a basis, project by project basis. So it's those other two, the 10-foot setback, and then the open space.
Okay, does that, any other comments about that? I can give my 2 cents. I tend to agree with Commissioner McMahon. I think the setback issue is something that's going to be mandated, and I'd rather not pick a fight if we can actually then look at these other issues. So I'm agreeable with the modification of what we were talking about for the open space and the courtyard. Question is exactly what are we saying then? Whoever makes the motion will have to identify exactly what we're recommending then as to those 2 issues. Again, I'm just trying to make, I don't make a motion, so. So with all that,
No one's made a motion yet.
Correct.
I mean, I think that's.
I'm just saying, make sure it's clear. So with all that, I think we've all commented. If anybody wants to make a motion then?
Can I ask, well, before you go, can I ask if we can like reduce the side yard setback reduction to 15 feet instead of 10? I mean, I'm just a little concerned about the building massing.
Again, I think at the end of the day, you can make whatever motion, it's your motion to make. I think from based on comments, you can glean where that vote may turn up, but obviously it's your motion to make.
Okay, you want me to make a motion?
It's up, again,
I'll make a motion.
it's up to you guys.
I'll make a motion. So let's do this. I'll move that we adopt a resolution that finds that pursuant to sections 15183 and 15168 C2 and 5 of the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, no further environmental document is required because of the proposed actions. Hold on, I want to get the wording. They're consistent with the city's goals, policies, and anticipated programs contained in the adopted general plan and housing element covered under a certified program environmental impact report, EIR, and we adopt an ordinance approving municipal code amendment MCA 2024-70004, amendments to chapter 3, 4, and 10 of Title 9 of the Thousand Oaks Municipal Code, including the amendments provided to us by staff, as well as the following amendments. That we remove the third floor setback minimum incentive, that we remove the open space requirements incentive from the minimum courtyard area. I'll go with that. We'll go with the 2 that we've seen we got consensus from the commission.
Okay, that's the motions on the floor. Any comments? Vice Chair Link, you have a look on your face like you have a comment.
I'm going to have to watch that back and see what that look on my face actually was. So we're looking at third floor setback, but not the side yard setback? Not the side yard setback, okay. And we're not looking at the public exterior space of the minimum 3% of the area building footprint?
would you like to have that excluded, included in the motion to exclude it from the incentive package?
If we're talking about all exterior space, yes. Public exterior space.
Mm-hmm. I'm agreeable to including that in there, depending upon what's the consensus of the commission? Are they agreeable to? I can include it in my motion and we can debate it, but I just wanted to get your sense.
Again, I would not be in favor of that. So I think you have others that would not go with that. But again, it's,
I think I won't include it at this point in time.
Okay.
Given the direction of the commission discussion.
Is it the exterior space or the third floor setback?
Not including the public exterior space. You wanted to have that portion excluded from the incentive package, correct?
But I'm questioning whether the fellow commissioners are concerned about whether it's the third floor setback or the 3% public exterior space for the mixed-use development standards 2-4.
I thought it was of the public exterior space.
Mr. Here, did you want to comment?
I'm looking at
No,
open space.
I think the motion from Commissioner Ferris was third floor setback, not to have that as a waiver, and the
Courtyard.
courtyard space, and have that removed as a incentive. Those are the two that you were using.
Right.
And the third 3% of area of building footprint was not one that was included in that motion. So you are having the courtyard change
Right.
to go back to where it was before, and you're having the third floor.
And that's the general consensus.
Those are the two things that were part of the motion.
Got it. Okay.
No other comments? Okay. Any other comments?
I'll comment.
Go ahead.
Because
Commissioner
I'm
Kellogg?
seeing here, everybody's like, what is she thinking? I would have supported this lock, stock, and barrel, to be honest. I really would have. Because I think what we're doing is, when we go to all of these we go to all of these seminars, and what does everybody say to us? You got to incentivize us to come into your town. You got to streamline things. Good governance is codifying, clarifying, streamlining. And that's why I would have supported this as written. I absolutely would have. Hearing, the fact that you guys, I just don't want to bind city staff's hands. I just don't. I think the fact that we're streamlining here is good governance. I really do. In talking to the people who are coming into our city, I mean, look at what we've entitled in the last year. Nothing's been built yet. And nothing's been built yet. And so I just don't, we want to meet our goals. And I would support the motion that you have made. But if we keep paring it down, I won't support that. So that's all.
Okay, any other comments? One more comment, Commissioner Ferris?
Yeah, just as a closing comment, and I take the comments of Commissioner Kettle had on this. I think that this is really the balance that we really need to have, right? In the discussion about what the full incentive package is that we recommend to council, I think we're trying to catch some dynamics of what's Sacramento going to do. What do we think is that right balance for them to approve it? They'll come back and they'll tell us if there are things that need to go. We may have a minimum courtyard of 5%, and that's it, if that's the case. But I do think that the residents also want to make sure that we're meeting their senses of how the development in the infill development meets their needs and consistent with the objective standards that we've sort of already started to put in place. So I feel I'm happy and thankful that the commission's engaged in a little discussion on it and tried to find some balance. I'm personally not completely comfortable with it, but I'm willing to, see this go forward as we try and evolve where the city goes.
As for me, I do agree with you in terms of trying to push for whatever we can. And the question being is, has the staff done that to the point where us pushing and tweaking a little bit more, does that create more problems than it solves? And that's hard to know. Again, we can't figure out what HCD is going to consider and look at. All I know is our housing element was the second longest, I think, in the county to be finally approved. And there's a reason. I mean, there's a lot of evaluation that went into that. So I'm trying to make sure we get the most we can, but not to a point where, even though we're trying to do a bracketing negotiation, not getting to a point where it calls into scrutiny other things, and we actually lose the things that we're trying to push for now that we're not maybe even identifying. So I will go along with the motion as part of this process to try to give us some back. Again, my concern is ultimately is I don't want to create more problems than we solve. So that's my 2 cents. So, Madam Secretary, please prepare us for a vote.
Commissioner Ferris?
Yes.
Commissioner Tyler Kettlehut?
Yes.
Commissioner McMahon?
Yes.
Vice Chair Link?
Yes.
Chair Lanson?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
And there is no appeal period on the recommendation of the Planning Commission to the City Council, and therefore I don't have to read the appeal language. Item 8, Department reports, there's none. Item 9, Commissioner comments and AB 1234 reports. Commissioner McMahon?
I just want to say I really appreciate the way we worked together on that last item. It felt really good that we could have a nice discussion and compromise and talk about things. And that's the way things should work, and it doesn't always happen. And so I'm really happy with us right now.
Any other comments? I will just say to everybody out there, I'm really happy about our 60-year pin, which is to celebrate the City of Thousand Oaks birthday, which is the same as my birthday. I'm 60 as well. Easy way to remember that. And second of all, if you haven't done so, please register to vote. Democracy works much better if you're actually part of it. Next, staff update. Ms. Melliker, is there any follow-up items, announcements, or upcoming issues?
Thank you, Chair. September 24th, tomorrow evening, there will be an appointment to the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy on the consent calendar. On October 8th, the City Council will hold a public hearing on this accessory dwelling unit ordinance update considered by the Planning Commission on the 9th of September. And on October 22nd, there will be a public hearing on another municipal code amendment to implement the housing element programs for voluntary lot mergers, which you just considered tonight, and the SB 35 streamlined process and incentives for affordable housing with lot consolidation that you heard this evening. In terms of what's upcoming for City Council, for Planning Commission, there will be, there's no items as of today scheduled for the October 7th meeting. An ordinance to implement housing element programs is scheduled for October 21st. And also 2 separate projects are proposed by the Conejo Recreation and Park District. The first project is to replace a building and renovate a baseball field, playgrounds, picnic areas, amphitheater, and other improvements at 1175 Hendricks Avenue. The second project is to demolish and rebuild the skate park facility at 190 North Reno Road. And those both, again, will be on October 21st. So those are the upcoming items. Thank you.
Looking at that calendar, Ms. Rice is going to have a very long evening. From what I can see, she has, I think, 3 of the 4 items that night. And that will be it. We will adjourn to the next potential meeting on October 7th. Good night, Thousand Oaks.